suggest we get started. The main event, I'll speak for a minute, and then the main event, hopefully that will give people an opportunity to come and find seats. Thank you for coming to this event. Before we get started, I just want to thank the sponsors of today's event, the Center for Women and Gender, and the Office of Research and Graduate Studies. I also want to thank our collaborators, Dean Mara Hagan of the College of Science, Rhonda Callister, Professor of Management, Helga Van Meegroep, Professor Emeritus of Wildland Resources, and our student researchers, Ace Bjorkia, Rachel Gulbranson, and Alicia Ingersoll. I'm Christy Glass. I'm a professor in sociology, and over the past year, we've conducted a climate survey of STEM faculty and graduate students with the support of Dean Mara Hagan, the College of Science, the Center for Women and Gender, and the Diversity Council at USU. And what we wanted to understand with these climate surveys was what factors contribute to the gender gap in retention and career mobility for faculty and graduate students in STEM fields. We know that nationally, the number of women earning graduate degrees has increased substantially, but we're not seeing an equivalent increase of women in academic positions that we might expect from the national availability. So our goal was to identify the challenges that scholars, particularly early career scholars, face, graduate students and pre-tenure faculty, as they pursue academic careers. And our findings suggested that that one of the challenges is building and sustaining professional relationships with mentors, colleagues, and peers that we all know are so vital for a successful academic career. So the purpose of today's panel is to facilitate discussion about how to overcome these challenges by hearing from a panel of women at every career stage about how they are successfully building those relationships or how they have successfully built those relationships in order to be successful. To motivate the discussion, I want to provide you with a very brief, I promise, a very brief sense of some of the findings from our climate survey that motivate today's discussion. So in terms of findings related to faculty at USU, STEM faculty at USU, we found that only 32% of women faculty agree that there is a lot of support for women at USU. Fewer than a third of women in our survey agree that there's a lot of support for women. This contrasts pretty dramatically with the proportion of men, with the percentage of men who think USU is a really good place for women. Women faculty also report, that was not meant to elicit giggles, but the giggles are understandable. Women faculty also report a weaker attachment to USU than their male peers, and this is a concern in terms of retaining outstanding women faculty over the course of the career. We know that faculty's sense of attachment to their university is a very strong predictor of whether they will stay at that university over time. Finally, compared to men, women faculty are more likely to feel ignored, talked down to, and excluded from informal networks. So what we see here in just these, this little bit of flavor of our data is that there is a significant challenge women face in terms of feeling a sense of support, in terms of developing a strong attachment to the institution, and in terms of those everyday relational and interactional mechanisms that actually create a sense of belonging. Let me share with you very briefly some of our key findings with regard to graduate students. We found that over a third of women graduate students report experiencing bias, harassment, or discrimination on the basis of gender. Right? This suggests that, again, over a third of women graduate students experience at some point in their career at USU bias, discrimination, or harassment. This is compared to a very much smaller percentage of men who report having experienced similar treatment. Women graduate students versus their male peers are also less likely to feel a sense of community among student peers. In other words, this relationship piece continues to come up in our findings with regard to women faculty as well as with regard to women graduate students. Women graduate students versus their male peers feel less support from their advisors and mentors in critical areas of networking, navigating departmental politics, and career advancement. This suggests that one of the barriers that women graduate students confront is developing those vital and sustainable relationships with advisors and mentors. Our goal today is to think through some of the ways this has been done successfully by the women on the panel, and also perhaps brainstorm ways that we can do a better job at USU in helping women build those critical relationships for career success. So I will turn off this so that it's not blinding our panelists. That would be counterproductive.
There's a question.
Oh, yeah, please.
Just wanted to confirm one more time, Christy. The information you just shared with us is specifically within the STEM.
Within the STEM fields, yeah. Our study was limited to STEM. Although I think my hope is that there are folks in the room that aren't in STEM. I think these issues are just as relevant and important. We just simply haven't conducted the climate survey for the remainder of the campus yet. So as I mentioned, the purpose of today's panel is to facilitate discussion about how to overcome some of these challenges by hearing from women who are and have overcome these challenges. And I'd like to know that while the findings are specific to STEM, certainly the insights of our panelists are in no way limited to folks in STEM. The design of the panel, the idea behind the panel was to identify successful women at every stage of the career, starting with Cindy Hansen, a PhD student in engineering, Elizabeth Vargas, assistant professor of biological engineering, Claudia Radel, an associate professor of geography and associate dean of the Quinney College of Natural Resources, and last but not least, Lisa Barreau, professor of chemistry and executive associate dean of the College of Science. Trust me when I tell you that all of these women are extremely successful, and I think you'll hear from each of them that one of the keys to their success has been successfully navigating professional relationships. Again, I want to emphasize, as we all know, professional relationships are vital to academic success. I don't know a single academic who wouldn't claim that relationships across the career played a critical role in their success. So I'll ask some questions of the panel, and while you're talking, I'll turn off the light.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I'll facilitate some questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience. So starting with our panelists, what role have mentors, collaborators, and/or colleagues played in your career and professional success thus far? That's not. That's getting
anonymous.
Wow. It just keeps getting worse. I think we're learning the sociologists shouldn't push buttons.
We're good, I think, Christy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good. So
You want me to go first?
I can go first. Doesn't
You go
matter. I think I'll start with just a story about this, and it's going to be from my administrative side. And one of the things, whenever you're taking a leap in a career, whether it's considering, what career choice you're going to make, or within that career area, whether you're going to leap to the next level, you need advice and to talk to people. And being honest, at some point in my life, I was considering jumping to administration. And I didn't find that I had anyone to talk to in my department. And so your question for me, the first thing it brought to mind for me was how colleagues had played a role in my leap to administration. And I just want to tell you, these things come about in weird ways. I got invited to a breakfast sometime in 2003 maybe, or 2004, with a bunch of women from campus who I knew very minimally. I'll say some names because they're big names on campus. One person there was Ann Austin. Another one was Christine Haley. Another one was Beth Foley. And they were all at stages in their career of associate this or assistant that. They were moving up, and they brought us together just to talk for a while. And what a powerful group for me to get associated with as that, at that point, an associate professor, newly minted associate professor. And so for me, I look back on that initial opportunity that I could have passed up. I could have passed up a breakfast, but all of a sudden I was in a network. And that network has paid off for me so much to consult with over the years. And so I have to say, for that first question, their role was tremendous in just spending time saying hi, getting to know them. So I guess my takeaway point is you never know when opportunity is going to come to get yourself into a new network. And this one fell into my arena instead of me having to seek it out, which I have lots of other stories for. But I'll stop.
Well, I can say something next. So first, I want to preface my contributions by saying a few things about how, and I don't know if this is true for the other folks up here on the panel, but you know, I was chuckling away at various points there because, you know, I think it's important for me to communicate, right, I think from the start that, you know, I don't think of myself as being someone who has been successful at building and sustaining and maintaining relationships. I think that, you know, like many academics, I'm an introvert, and it's been very, I think, always kind of an active attempt to connect to people and to build relationships. And I don't think I've been necessarily successful at it in the way that I want to be successful at it, right? So I'm always kind of looking to connect more. But, you know, in trying to then reflect on the relationships that I have built and the kinds of relationships I have with people, I think they have been important. And some of those relationships are just my working relationships with the people around me, which I think I have good working relationships with the people around me. And that includes, you know, my peers, my supervisors, but also my grad students and junior faculty. And I think that that has been important for me and my, I don't know. See, and I even feel uncomfortable. This is, I think, something we should talk about, right? Because I even feel uncomfortable saying in my successful career. Because, you know, to me, I still feel like I'm just bumbling along blindly. You know, but I think that having good working relationships with people around me, which I've tried to build, has been important to being able to figure out how to do things and get things done and move in the direction that I was interested in moving. Collaborators for my research have been incredibly important, but they've also been very few. So I have a few really strong collaborations, and they happen to be with people that I consider to be friends and peers, kind of my own. One of them is someone that I built a relationship with as a grad student. She was another grad student in the same program. And at the time, it wasn't clear that it was going anywhere, right? But we decided to work on a project together. And it turned out to be one of the most productive collaborative relationships that I could imagine, in that we have worked together ever since. And it's made a huge difference to me, because just the reality is that, you know, two sets of hands, two sets of heads, two ways of seeing things has made a huge difference in terms of what we've been able to achieve than I could have done by myself. But it's not like I went and found that relationship thinking ahead, right? It was more that at the time it was something that I was excited to do, and it felt right. And some of those, you know, have gone nowhere, some similar kinds of experiences, and others have really kind of turned out to be pivotal in my research career. So in some ways, I think the message is somewhat similar in that I think that, you know, there are things that I could say and maybe will later about kind of how I approach or think what I think is important in these relationships. But I think part of what I wanted to communicate today is that some of this for me has just been about kind of trying to be open to opportunities to connect to people. And some of those connections then really make a difference and some of them don't. And you never know. And so it's really, I think, about kind of approaching all the relationships that I have with people with kind of that, the what I see as kind of the bases that could build into something in terms of my respect for people, attempts to kind of have an open communication, and then just kind of seeing where they go, really. I don't feel like mentorship has been extremely important in my own life. Like it's something that and maybe that's common too, it's something that I have always wished I had stronger mentors, as if such a thing existed. Maybe it doesn't even exist, right? And it was just something that I continue to yearn for. But so I always kind of try to think about in my own relationships then, what is the mentor I wish I had? What is the collaborator I wish I had? And try to be that person in the relationships that I try to then build with people.
Thank you. Elizabeth or Cindy?
I'll go. Yeah. I'd say one of the important, one of the things that mentors have done for me is add perspective. That's something that's been valuable for me. Some of the people that I talk to, say if I have questions about what to do for a career choice or whatnot, it's been helpful to have a variety of people with different backgrounds. For example, I used to work at Idaho National Lab, and while I was there, I had a mentor there that I still continue to talk to on a regular basis. And her background is in education as well as in a national lab, and it's been interesting to have her perspective and hear from her experience, and it's actually been helpful for me to be able to make decisions. I don't know if you mentioned this before, but Dr. Varghese is my advisor, and so.
So you've had excellent mentors.
Yes, I would actually say yes. That's true. One of the things that's been helpful is when I've had questions is to talk to Dr. Varghese to get the academic viewpoint. And so having people in different areas has been very helpful for me to get a bigger perspective of the decisions I'm making.
Great.
And so I'll just talk about mentors. I've had a few as an undergrad, as a master's student, and a PhD student, and then during my postdoc. And I can make a list of pros and cons of all of them or who I would go to in different circumstances. And I think we'll touch about this later, but with some of them I've faced challenges. But when I look back at those relationships, it took me way too long to figure this out. But two of the four mentors, the big academic career mentors in my life, have been female Indian women. Okay, which is the same as female, but now, so Indian women who have been successful in their careers, and with families, and I just didn't understand that I was gravitating towards that, but when I look back at it now, I'm like, oh, so my PhD advisor and the person I first started doing research with, they were both female and Indian. So I don't know what that means, and probably Christy knows what that actually means, but I think that it's important at my level to seek out relationships that are worthwhile, and I might potentially need people who look like me, have similar issues that I have in terms of having a family and navigating this, USU as a woman. And so those relationships, those mentoring relationships came organically, so I didn't seek them out because they were Indian and female, but I stuck with them maybe because they were. So I'm not the expert here. I'm an engineering professor. I'm the only female in my department, and so things are different now, but I think that it's important for me to remember that even when I was navigating this as an undergraduate or as a PhD student, that I had these mentors and that potentially students are looking at me to fill that role as well.
Yeah, as Elizabeth suggested, the next question has to do with challenges. I'd love to hear from all of you about challenges you faced early in your career or even later in the career to forming productive relationships. So what were those gaps? What were those challenges? And how did you overcome those?
I'll go. So my research involves combining basically 3 different elements together to do the work I'm doing. And of the 3, Dr. Varghese covers 2 of them. One is Raman spectroscopy and then microfluidics. And so for questions I had about those, I could go directly to Dr. Varghese and ask her for help with those things. The last one was dielectrophoresis, which no one on campus does. And so that's been difficult. That was difficult to be able to get that up and going. So one of the things I had to do was to find mentors at different conferences and build a relationship there, so that if I had questions, I could come and contact them about those things, about those questions that I would have. And so using not only conferences, say, as a way to put out the information, what you're doing, your research, but also using that as an opportunity to help get association with people that you need to be able to succeed in what you're trying to do. Yeah.
So as a young faculty member in chemistry, I was telling my graduate students this yesterday, and this was just about 20 years ago. And the mentality at the time when you were leaving your postdoc, I'll use a phrase, they threw you out of the nest. Okay, the way you were evaluated as an assistant professor in chemistry was what you did productively that was clearly different than anything you'd done before. And so that was challenging at the beginning because it wasn't a place where I felt comfortable, and I didn't go back to my postdoctoral advisor. I didn't go back to my PhD advisor. And so some of the things that helped me in my early years were connecting to people outside USU. When I was at meetings, when I was giving presentations, people who would come up to me and I would talk with them proved to be some of the best people to get advice from. I owe people in my field who at that time, invited me to something extra or did something. So that was hard. The other thing I'll just mention that's a challenge, because I think those are the ones that stick with you. It's when you do something and one of your colleagues says something to you that's just biting. That is the stupidest decision I have ever seen, is one that I've had from my department head to my face. I thought he was wrong, and he was wrong. But getting over it took me a heck of a long time. And so when you're building your networks, I encourage you. At that point, that was something where I made a career decision, and my current department head said something like that to me. I found solace in my friends who were at similar career stages, who I could talk to. Again, not here. I was very much like Elizabeth. I was the second woman in my department. So, but I guess my words here are about your networks can be broad. Your networks can be well outside the barriers of the walls of the building you're in. And I've found actually that a lot of my mentors are outside those walls, or my advisors. They might be in buildings here on the USU campus, but also all over the country and in other parts of the world.
So I was trying to think back to challenges. I don't know that I have overcome those challenges, but it connects to the next question I know Chrissy's going to ask us, which would be, what I wish I had known before. Do you mind if I'm bringing that in already? No. So, I found it very hard when I started my position here at USU because I came straight out of a PhD program and I didn't have what I perceived to be an existing network of collaboration that I could continue to work with. And part of that challenge for me came out of the fact that I had gone into a PhD program with my own funding. Mm-hmm. And so I was not an RA for somebody else. And so my advisors, I wasn't working on projects with my advisors. I was only working on my own project. And so all I had was what I had done for my PhD to kind of build on, right? And I looked around and I saw people who had done postdocs and who were publishing with their advisors, and they were publishing with their postdoc advisors. And so I had a kind of a period of time that took couple of years to really feel like I could start to be productive as I kind of built up new work and continued to kind of build this collaboration with my friend. But so one of the challenges, I think, was that I wasn't kind of naturally embedded into networks of research that could continue to support my productivity kind of as I transitioned into a faculty position. So what I wish I had known then was how important some of that could have been. Like, I could have gone out of my way to kind of try to build more collaboration or network, but that was not the culture that was being communicated to me, right? It was about, doing this PhD work and getting it done, and don't get distracted, and instead of, and I think this has shifted, right? So I wish that at the time I had made efforts to already start building those collaborations and to go to my advisor and say, hey, I know you're not going to pay me as an RA, but I want to be part of your project too, right? And I wish I had done a postdoc for the same reason. And I think in my field that's shifted as well, so that it's become more the norm now. So I was trying to think about what that lesson means for me, thinking about kind of how do you create these kinds of more natural connections where then you can build off of that for supporting your own research. And I think there probably are ways that we can do that for ourselves, and I think there are also ways that institutionally we can do that for people as well. So we'll leave that for later.
So in thinking of this question, there are two parts. It's how did you face challenges early in your career, and then how did you overcome those? And I'm currently facing plenty of challenges, but I don't know how I've overcome them yet. So maybe I'll be called back in 5 years or something. But the biggest challenge that I faced really early on was when I started graduate school. And I went into a program where you could kind of rotate for your first semester, and then you picked your advisor, and it was a master's and PhD program. And so the point was you did work with your advisor as a master's student, and then you push that into your PhD, and everything went smoothly. And I did not get along with my master's advisor. And it took a while for me to figure that out, because I really liked the research they were doing. I liked the other people in the lab, but I just didn't like our relationship. He was the type of person who would stand and watch me do experiments, and some people might be into that. I was not. And so I found myself like, okay, he has to take his kids into school at 8:30, so I'm going to come in from 7:45 to 9:45. Then I'm going to go somewhere else, and then he has to pick his kids up at 3. So I'm going to come back. I mean, like crazy stuff. And I was waking up and not excited about coming in, and all of that was not what I had experienced as when I was doing research as an undergraduate. So I started to like cross things off the list, like what was the reason for all this, and it boiled down to our relationship. And it was really hard, and I talked to a bunch of people in my department and also my undergraduate research mentor, and I decided after speaking to all of them that it was best for me to quit his lab. And so it took me extra time with my PhD, but as soon as I quit his lab and started working with on a different project, I felt myself return to how I had been as an undergraduate researcher, which was the whole reason I had started my PhD program. And so that was it felt like a failure, because I had gone in, I had this money, and I was going to work for him, and it was going to be awesome, and the project was going to be great. And then that was like I'm basically starting from scratch. And I learned, what Cindy was talking about. I had to learn about Raman spectroscopy, these things that I had very little knowledge and frankly interest in. But it all worked out in the end, but that was a tough realization to say, like, I just quit. I failed at doing research with that research mentor.
Thank you. As Claudia mentioned, the next question is, looking back, what would you tell your graduate student self? And Cindy, you can tell us what you would tell yourself last year. Yeah. But if you could go back, what do you wish you had known? What would have made the difference for you if you had known this earlier in your career?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So what I was thinking about was my experience with my master's degree. And that one, it was similar to what Dr. Varghese had experienced. I chose to do the work with the advisor based on the project. The project was so awesome, and I was so excited about it that I ignored some red flags that I had seen previously. To give you an example, it was laser spectroscopy project on molten salts, and it was for a nuclear engineering degree. Anyway, and interacting with him the first time, I recognized that his communication, the communication between me and him, it wasn't there. And then also to see him interact with some of his colleagues as well. It was very telling of how he was going to interact with me later on, but I was willing to overlook some of those things because I wanted to work on the project so badly. And that's something that I wish I had taken into consideration beforehand. One is the project itself, but also how you are going to interact with your advisor, because that's a close-knit relationship. And if it's not going to jive well, likely the project isn't going to jive well either. And so that was something that I wish I had known as more like practicality, as like how do you go about figuring that out. One is listening to your gut response when you first meet the person. The second one was something, actually a piece of information that I received from someone later on, was that when you go to a school to like kind of, the interview process, being like, is this going to be a good fit or not? When you have time alone with the students that work with the actual advisor that you're interested in working with, is to ask them one-on-one. And so hopefully you can be able to arrange that, whether maybe you have to be like, get an email or a phone number and contact them later. I would suggest doing that and asking them pointed questions to figure out, do they enjoy working with this person? Is it hard? Making sure that you're walking into the experience with your eyes open. Let's see. Yeah, I think I covered everything that I thought would be good for that item. So.
Two things came to mind here for me that I wish I had known as a graduate student. One was, don't feel afraid to approach anyone. I think at that stage of our lives, we're more reticent to maybe go up and talk to someone. But one of the characteristics, at least in my area of science, is that science has a professional side and it has a social side. And a lot of times, the social side can be a place where, at a meeting when people are having a drink, let's say, or having some snacks or something after presentation, is a great time to meet people in your field. And my advisor never really talked to me about that, about the part about developing professional relationships with other people and how to go about that. The other thing I'd wish I'd known was that meetings, if you want to network in your field, meetings come in different flavors. And some flavors are going to be easy to meet people, and some are not. And so one of the things I try to share with my students now is, hey, you should go to this kind of meeting, and you should go to this other kind of meeting, because they're very different experiences. One meeting, you're going to sit and have all your meals with all the people who are attendees for the next 4 days. So you'll know everything about them by the time you leave. Other meetings, you pass each other in the hallway because there's 10,000 people there. And both are important to your career development, but they have very different outcomes in terms of, meeting people within your field. And so the other thing I guess I'd say about developing professional relationships as a graduate student is I never left the lab. Seriously. I mean, you're focused on, I want to get paper number 5 out, or paper number 6 out. That's great, and that's all part of being a graduate student. But also spending that 10 minutes talking to your sharpest colleague in an adjacent field who can push you a little bit and say, well, I don't understand how this works in your research. And, that can be extremely helpful as well for your professional development. And so I encourage you to interact with your colleagues in your department who aren't necessarily your group members, who can help you see the bigger picture And that's something that's really beneficial.
So, the one thing I would add to what I said before maybe is, something that I think, I've learned from one of my grad students, which is, asking questions. I'm not good at always asking questions, but she is amazing at asking questions. And the kinds of questions she asks me, I'm often like a little bit, it takes me aback momentarily because it never even occurred to me that she wouldn't know this, right? And so, I think that that's probably true, that people around you don't know to tell you things because it hasn't occurred to them that you don't know it, right? And so if, I think as a grad student or even as me, asking questions of other people, is actually really important because they have no idea.
That's great.
And just to echo Cindy, I wish I had trusted my gut. And even when I started my faculty position here, I had a few incoming graduate students, not Cindy. And I did not trust my gut with one or two of them. And so I went down the same pathway where we were not communicating. And I just, our gut is something that we have honed in over all these years. And so it's obviously trying its best. And if we're just like, oh no, I must get all the graduate students that come wanting to work for me, or I must continue with my master's because I'm supposed to. No, my gut was telling me something before and I could have just listened to it. So that's one thing I wish I would have known. I should probably just post it on my board to listen to yourself, But, it sounds like that might be something that women do, is not take their own opinions seriously or what their own feelings are seriously because they've been told something else. So that might be one thing.
Thanks. I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions from the audience. So if it's okay, I'll skip to the last question, which is, I've heard from all of you that relationships matter, and they matter in different ways, and over the course of the career, different relationships become more salient or less salient. And I've heard some of you talk about things that were really helpful. For example, Elizabeth mentioned seeing people like her, gravitating toward people who had similar life experience, maybe had some similarity with you in terms of gender or race, ethnicity, or background, or even family characteristics. I heard Lisa mention informal support networks, just going to a breakfast that facilitated entrance into a network that provided you a lot of informal guidance. And I've heard several of you mention the importance of cross-boundary interactions, seeking out relationships outside of your unit, whatever that may be, outside of your discipline or college or department. In light of some of our findings from the climate survey, what changes at USU would be most impactful in terms of addressing some of the challenges each of you have faced or continue to face? What could we be doing better?
Can't we just throw that out to everyone?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that comes to my mind is, right, having a more diverse faculty in STEM fields and in all fields, right, so that graduate students, regardless of who they are, they have folks who look like them or have similar experiences of them and can help guide them.
I do have a comment.
Yeah, please.
I think it's important not to relieve an individual of their responsibility in this. I guess what I'm trying to say is that an individual needs to put forth the effort to have mentors and to have those relationships. And I guess, for example, one of the things that I try to do is that I try to keep in regular contact with people that I want to have as a mentor. And so that's extending myself, reaching out, whether it be a phone call or an email, and but do that on a consistent basis so that that is a fresh relationship. And so that's something that that as an organization, that's hard to do, but as an individual, I think there's a lot of responsibility that should be placed there.
Any other responses? Any other kind of ideas, or shall we open it up?
Let's open it up.
Open it up. All right. Yeah, and please feel free to share your ideas of, what you're hearing and what you think, USU could be doing that we're not doing or doing things differently, and also questions for the panel.
I want to go back to a question that both of you had, Dr. Vargas and also
Cindy.
regarding about your gut feelings on that. And taking the research that we had about identifying with an attachment of USU, did you both feel that relationship with that advisor that just was not working well, was it something that you felt that someone could, through assertiveness or through sharing your thoughts, have made a change, or was there just no way your mentors and your other colleagues said, get out of there? I mean, was there any salvage that you could have done through confronting the individual? In an assertive way, not in an aggressive way, but in an assertive way. And I'm just asking that question as we work with a lot of undergraduates and we're trying to push them towards assertiveness, and I'd be very interested to hear that.
I honestly didn't think that was an option for me. I was a first-year graduate student. He was a full professor, or almost a full professor. He had favorites in his lab and not favorites, and so I didn't know how to navigate that. It wasn't like it was probably a systemic issue, but it wasn't like all of these people are being mistreated. It was, I'm just one person probably, so what can I do? But I'm sure if we talk to the alumni of the lab, I'm sure we all have our stories where this stuff was happening. So, no, but I also think it was Lisa who mentioned that I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody, so I wish I had gone to something like this, and then I could have talked to my department head at the time and the director of the graduate studies then, because maybe they do know about many cases of this, but I didn't know I could go just walk into their office.
Yeah, I'm not sure as well. I know that in our department we actually have a situation where it's kind of like a third party, if you will, of someone that you can contact, say if you're having issues with your advisor or whatnot, and that they can kind of help facilitate that. That's the only thing, like as an organization, that I can think of that you could do. But I was in a similar situation that Dr. Varghese was in. I was a first-year graduate student. The advisor that I was working with, he was bringing in a lot of funding to do the research, and so it was kind of like what choices do I have? Yeah, so it's. Sorry, I'm not sure I have a clear-cut answer for you there. But yeah.
Lisa or Claudia, any experience with conflict where you felt like kind of sticking up for yourself was a successful pathway?
I think that, I don't know if this is answering your question exactly, but just some thoughts about this. I think for me, there's kind of two things that maybe are in conflict with each other. And one is that I think that it shouldn't be on us all to make every relationship work, right? Mm-hmm. But then on the other hand, there are relationships that we get to choose, and there are others that it's not clear what choice we have. In the end, I think that communication is really important. I've had collaborations that have had major bumps at various points, and communication, a failure of communication was almost always the issue. And being able to get past that through clear communication about our expectations with each other and kind of how we were feeling about various things made all the difference. But in the end, I think life is too short to try to make all the relationships, that all the connections you have with people work, because some of them just aren't gonna be satisfying or work, or and sometimes and I think this is where I've come with my own kind of relationships for my success, is that I've stopped trying to collaborate with people who I don't get along with anyway. Right? I want to collaborate with people that I enjoy spending time with. So, you know, I know that doesn't work for your colleagues always, because your colleagues, you have to figure it out, you have to make things work, or, you know, you may have the opportunity or not to change advisors, right? But I think that a little bit, I'm going to kind of push back on this idea that it's on each of us as individuals, although I know that's not what you meant exactly, right? But I think that thinking also about what we can do as an institution to create the environment that kind of facilitates more positive relationships is, I think, more important than thinking about what we as individuals can do, or what we should be telling students that they should be doing. Throw that out there.
So, your question brought up many thoughts for me, Christy. One of the ones I think about when I hear about issues regarding graduate students, say, and their advisors, is I go back to conversations I have with my own graduate students when they're choosing who to have, say, on their master's committee, or who to have on their doctoral committee. These are very important people. And I often talk with students about the characteristics of individuals to have in your network, because those characteristics will flow through to many, many things. Like, for example, how important it is to think about a committee member who's going to be a very reliable committee member and you always know will write you a letter that's fair, that they evaluate you, that they take the time, that they talk with you and things. So I think one of the things is to recognize that there are already built-in things within the program that maybe we don't see all the time. If there's a conflict with an advisor, for example, your committee members are also there to support you. For a promotion and tenure candidate who has a committee, I tell them the same things often. You want someone who's really thoughtful on that committee, whose experience and approach to things is a broad perspective. And so that they can help give you feedback along the way. And so, because the other thing that brought up in your question was, I've imagined those times I've walked into my direct supervisor's office, not you, Mara, and I've walked in and just had a disagreement with she or he. And it can be a very direct disagreement. And it's very hard to walk out of there and you've stood up for yourself. Maybe you even know you're right. But, you know, it takes time sometimes, and it takes time for that to come about. But that's where, you know, if you have these other people, like if I could, you know, if I've stood up for myself and I'll be patient and things will come along, you know, perhaps the way I want them to, but that you have other people that you can go talk to. Maybe I'm the one who needs to have my mind, you know, fixed, and somebody else helps me with that. But think about these issues when you're putting together things like committees and stuff, because these people can be wonderful support and give you guidance when needed too.
That suggests a really important kind of additional relationship. We've been talking about mentors, advisors, collaborators, and colleagues, but advocates, you know, being thoughtful about kind of building advocates, building a network of advocates can be key. Yeah, Mara.
So I'd like to change the focus of the discussion for just a little bit, harkening back to the introduction that you gave us, Christy, where you highlighted some of the results of the survey. And as a person in a leadership position, I'm extremely concerned about the fact that a third of our female graduate students don't feel safe, just to paraphrase the term. And so that's something that I think we as an institution should address. And I would be very interested to hear ideas not only from our panelists, but also from our audience about what we as a community can do to try to address this issue and allow people to find USU to be a safe place for them to pursue their graduates.
I was actually thinking about that as I was listening to everybody in this past couple of questions. I would think that having a panel like this, not with the same panelists obviously, but having it throughout the school year, all with, you know, geared towards female students and faculty, to have this place to discuss any issues or questions. I think that'd be really helpful.
So thematic, varying the theme, but okay.
I just have a question. This is something I'm confused about throughout many different university campuses. What kind of training, if any, do professors get as far as being a mentor? Like I know, beyond the sexual harassment issues and things like that, but what I feel like there's not any, or if there is, it's very minimal. And I think that would be extremely, extremely helpful. Not only for I'm a grad student, so not only for graduate students to understand what the expectations we should have of our mentor is, or our advisors who we would like to be our mentors, etc. But also for professors who are receiving graduate students to understand what their responsibilities or what their expectations are for us. Do we have any answers, or do we?
I'll just speak for myself.
Yeah.
Zip, zero, none. Not, yeah.
The only time I've ever seen it happen a little bit is, for example, in a student committee meeting, when a student is outside the room, sometimes the senior faculty on the committee will help to provide maybe a junior faculty member with some insight on a student issue that has come up during the meeting, but it's very informal and it's behind closed doors and, just happens if something comes up.
So the RGS does have the training for research faculty, and one of those, I think they're supposed to be monthly, I don't know how often they actually happen, but one of those in the 4 years I've been here has been about mentoring. And so, you talk 10 minutes about communication, 15 minutes about, I don't know, whatever, so, you could talk an hour and a half about just communication with your research group, and that could be a whole series.
But I think the answer to your question is insufficient. It's insufficient.
I think that would
In
be
fairness to
something
the professors, they really would benefit. You train your whole life in your science, and then you get a position, and all of a sudden you're expected to be a mentor, and you haven't been trained, and perhaps you have not been in a healthy relationship in the first place. So, that's what you're modeling. Yeah.
Thanks, Tara.
Other suggestions or questions? Yeah.
I would like to talk about some things that already I saw in my country, Iran, when we were working about gender issues, especially with United Nations. In majority of our panels or training or other things regarding gender issues or inequality, we saw only women participate. But the main problem is majority of the problem for women came from other side, I mean from men. But when we have an educational program or training, most people in that program are women. And I would like to know how SU can have a plan for this to involve men. For example, in this panel, a few lovely men. But I would like to know, we have any plan or program to involve men in our training or panel or program or not?
I think the answer right now would be no.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. When faculty talk about issues, one context that sometimes happens is in department meetings. And departments have variable leadership. And so there are some leaders, I think, who are probably talking about issues and talking about the kinds of things we're addressing here today. Other leaders are not. There's nothing formal there that I know of, at least.
Yeah, our past faculty meeting was about mental health in our department, and especially with our graduate students and resources on campus. And only 3 out of the 9 faculty members showed up. So they saw on the agenda that it was going to be about not research or building space or whatever, and so they didn't come.
You know, I was a facilitator for the United Nations in Iran for violence against women, and once I told to them I will stop that because always we have something for women, and actually we should have more than women for men workshop or educational because actually problem came from that side,
Please. Just to piggyback off that, because I think that's a key thing, because I think many times, this isn't always the case, by any means, but sometimes the issues that result from the gender inequality issues and things like that, sometimes they're not necessarily intentional. Sometimes it's just how you've always communicated, because you've always worked with men, and men communicate differently in general, and they just don't know how to deal with a different style. You know what I mean? Like,
Insufficient training.
yeah. Sometimes they don't know how else to handle certain things. If the only consistent, significant relationships they've had with women have been in family relationships, those are different. And so people need training on both sides instead of just women getting training on how to advocate for themselves. Men being able to recognize, oh, maybe the way I said this isn't going to work for this person. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of great research out there in a whole field of communication and gender issues and perceptions and all of that we should be using that information to build things that are helpful.
Scientists using data?
That's applied, right? No?
Other questions, comments, experiences you'd like to share?
Yeah, Meredith.
Something I would think would make women feel safer, whether that's physically safe or safe to speak up. I'm over in the business school where we have, I think, between 10 and 15% women, tenure track or tenured women faculty, so we're few and far between. And I think there's something that comes out of a sense of community and cohesion and just getting together and going, oh, you know what? I'm not just one of 10 in this ginormous school, so opportunities to connect with women across campus in groups like this. I have to say, listening especially on the front end to a lot of our panelists kind of gave me goosebumps to be reminded that, yeah, we're not that few and far between when we get to our room together like this. So I think something that kind of builds cohesion and that sense of community, and I think that can look like a lot of different things.
Sure. That would engage grad students and faculty across unit, within unit as well as across unit. Sure.
Build those mentorships we've been talking about.
Yeah. Informal, having an informal network of people you can just go to and say, I'm having this problem. Is this normal? Is it me? What do you do? As we've heard from several of our panelists who've been in situations that they needed guidance and having access to folks in an informal basis. Because I think a lot of times we don't go to senior people in our departments on a formal basis because we don't want to getting back and what about retribution and great, thanks.
I want to add something. So I think that part of the overarching challenge in my own assessment is the incentive structures in science and academia, right? And there, I think leadership in departments, in colleges, on campus can make a huge difference in terms of communicating to each other what we value. So, part of the reason I don't think that people show up for optional workshops, and also I'm not sure that I feel any better about kind of a slew of mandatory workshops, but is because there's no incentive, right? Because all we value in science is, H factors and, no, that's not even right. Your H index. And the impact factors of the journals you publish in, right? And so yes, we have an award for being a good mentor of graduate students. Yes, we have an award for teaching and for undergraduate research mentorship. but, you know, if you talk to most department heads, they're gonna say, oh, you know, what matters is who wins the research award, right? So as long as all of us the message that that stuff doesn't matter in the end, then nothing is going to change, I think, in terms of the way that people spend the time that is required to invest in relationships, even though those end up mattering, right? But I think it's something that we can change, right? Because sometimes it's tempting to look at that and be like, well, that's just academia, that's just science, and what are we going to do about it? But I think that leadership can make a difference, and the way that we kind of communicate with each other about what matters on campus.
Thank you. Any final comments from the panelists or from the audience? If I may make a quick plug, one of our collaborators on the climate survey, Helga Van Meegert, will be presenting data that we also collected on awards at USU over the past 40 years and the gender distribution of awards, including
There's a distribution.
So she has data over 40 years on the range of research awards that we award, as well as the range of teaching and mentoring awards, and she's presenting this work next week, Wednesday, 4:00 p.m. in Main 224. Please join us if that's a topic that interests you. I'll give away the store by saying that being a man, irrespective, holding constant productivity, we actually don't observe any differences across gender in terms of research output at each level of the faculty, assistant, associate, and full. Irrespective of no differences in gender, research output measured in a variety of different indicators, men are 2 to 3 times more likely to win research awards, and as Claudia mentioned, that matters a lot in terms of career advancement in a way that some of the other awards don't. So please join us next Wednesday, 4:00, Main 224, to hear the incomparable Helga Van Meegert share some of her findings from this study. Any other questions, comments? Please.
So like for the results of the climate study, are those going to be like posted or published somewhere?
So the results from the graduate student climate survey, kind of key findings data sheets, are posted on the Diversity Council's website. If you go to the Diversity Council and click on research and reports, some heading like that, you will actually be able to link to key findings with regard to gender, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ status, and religion, how graduate students experience the campus along those different axes. The findings from and we'll also be presenting those findings to the Office of Research and Graduate Studies next month. Those are the folks who design, a lot of the policies and practices that affect graduate students here, and we're hoping to make sure that those folks know what we found in this study. We presented a final report of our data to Dean Marhagen in the College of Science, and we're currently working on an executive report that we'll submit to President Cockett. Any other questions? Please help me thank our amazing panelists. Thank you.